There are moments when truth doesn't vanish. It's rewritten, not torn away in violence, but edited quietly, one uncertain memory at a time. This is where our story begins, in the soft erosion of what someone once knew for sure. Her name was Elise. She had always trusted her mind, the way she remembered faces, places, details others forgot. But lately, things had begun to shift in small, imperceptible ways. The kind of shifts you can't quite point to, yet somehow feel. One morning, she found a picture frame slightly turned on the wall. Not much, barely noticeable. She adjusted it, the way one might smooth a wrinkle on a sheet. That evening, her partner, Daniel, asked with casual amusement, "Did you move the frame again? You really don't remember, do you?" His tone was soft, almost kind, yet something in it made her stomach tighten. She was certain she hadn't touched it twice. Still, the way he said it made her question that certainty. And that's how it always starts. Not with lies shouted, but doubts whispered. Weeks passed, and Elise found herself apologizing more than she spoke, for things she hadn't done, for words she hadn't said. Each time Daniel would smile faintly in reply. "It's okay, you've always been forgetful." She began keeping mental notes. Little lists in her mind of what had truly happened. Yet the next time something went missing or misplaced, Daniel's version would sound so logical, so composed, that her list began to sound like fiction, even to herself. This is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a term introduced by Leon Festinger in the 1950s. It describes a mental discomfort that arises when our perception of reality conflicts with someone else's convincing version of it. And in the case of gaslighting, this discomfort doesn't fade, it festers. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. One evening, Elise was late returning home. Rain fell heavily. Her phone battery had died, and she arrived flustered, apologetic. Daniel opened the door with an unreadable expression. He said he'd called her 5 times, that she'd ignored him. When she tried to explain, he sighed and said, "You always have excuses." Then, for the first time, he raised his voice, not loud, but enough to pierce her calm. He accused her of being careless, detached, selfish. She stood still, drenched, trembling, unable to form a defense. After all, what if he was right? Gaslighting thrives on the erosion of self-trust. Carl Jung once wrote, "Through pride we are ever deceiving ourselves." In such manipulation, pride isn't the target. Memory is. By undermining memory, the gaslighter reshapes identity itself. Because what are we, if not the stories we remember about ourselves? Days turned to months. The apartment felt colder now. Even sunlight seemed to hesitate at the windows. Daniel had started correcting Elise's recollections mid-conversation, claiming she'd said something she hadn't, or forgotten something she swore she remembered. At first, she argued. Later, she only listened. It was easier that way. One night, he asked if she'd turned off the stove before leaving for work. She said yes. She was sure of it. When she came home, the burner was still on. The smell of gas filled the air. Daniel's expression was grave, disappointed, as though her carelessness had nearly destroyed them both. She didn't speak. She only stared, frozen between fear and confusion. That night, she barely slept. But here's what made it crueler. The next morning, she found the gas knob twisted again, deliberately, and she realized it wasn't forgetfulness. It was control disguised as concern. This is what modern psychology calls covert emotional abuse. It's not a single event. It's a pattern, small enough to escape notice, persistent enough to shape belief. Over time, the target begins to internalize the manipulator's narrative until it becomes indistinguishable from their own. What came next would make her question everything she believed. Elise started recording her days, small voice memos, private notes, a digital diary of truth, she told herself. And yet, even when she played them back, doubt lingered. Could she have fabricated these too? Daniel's confidence was intoxicating. He spoke with such ease, such certainty, that his truth always seemed heavier than hers. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, once observed that people grow toward what they perceive as real. So when another person manipulates reality, they don't just alter behavior, they alter growth itself. Gaslighting, then, is not simply deception. It's psychological confinement. One afternoon, Elise found an old photograph in a drawer, a picture of her laughing freely, sunlight spilling across her face. The image felt foreign. Had she ever been that person? She tried to recall the sound of her own laughter and couldn't, and that realization frightened her more than Daniel ever could. Except something else was happening beneath the surface. She began to distance herself quietly, less talking, fewer explanations, a withdrawal not from him, but from the endless cycle of persuasion. Each time he corrected her, she nodded gently, no longer resisting. He mistook her silence for surrender. It was not. Inside, Elise was beginning to observe in the way a scientist observes an experiment, detached, curious, analytical. She noted the timing of his accusations, the way they followed moments when she'd express independence or joy. It wasn't random. It was strategy. That's when she realized. The gaslighter doesn't seek truth. They seek control over what you believe truth to be. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. She began documenting everything, quietly, meticulously, and when she finally confronted him with proof, his reaction wasn't guilt. It was mockery. He smiled and said, "You really need help." That's the paradox of gaslighting. Evidence never frees you if the manipulator has already rewritten your trust. Psychologists describe this moment as a cognitive break, when the victim finally recognizes a pattern, but their sense of self is too fractured to act on it. Elise felt that break in her bones. She moved through days mechanically, like someone watching her own life from behind glass. But in that glass, reflection began, the faint outline of someone she used to be. As she stepped into the quiet of her new apartment, a strange awareness settled over her. The rooms were empty, the walls bare, yet she felt an unspoken witness in every corner. For years, she had unconsciously measured herself against someone else's version of reality. Now, she could finally start observing her own life without filters imposed by another. In those silent moments, she began noticing small truths she had ignored. The sound of her own breath, the way sunlight fell across the floor, the gentle creak of the old wooden beams. Each sensation was an anchor, a proof that reality still existed beyond manipulation. It reminded her of Daniel Kahneman's work on attention and perception, how our awareness, when carefully observed, can distinguish between the real and the suggested. Her mornings took on a ritualistic quality. She would sit by the window, make tea, and trace the contours of the world outside, watching the slow swaying of tree branches, the rhythm of people passing by, the subtle shifts in light. She realized that trust in herself had to be rebuilt moment by moment, through repetition, mindfulness, and observation. One afternoon, she received a message from a former friend. It was simple. "I've been thinking about you." Elise paused. In the past, she might have questioned the intention, read between lines, and doubted her own perception. But now she read it plainly. The words existed on the screen. The intention, however she interpreted it, did not change the fact of the message itself. She smiled quietly. Even a small victory felt monumental. She began journaling again, not for evidence, but for reflection. Each entry became an exhibit of her internal world, a careful archiving of her own mind. She wrote about small victories, moments of self-recognition, the ways she had been deceived, and how she had learned to untangle each thread. Each line reinforced her autonomy, her right to witness her own reality without interruption. And then she noticed patterns, not in others, but within herself. The ways she had allowed doubt to grow, the moments she second-guessed her instincts, the habitual apologizing for things that weren't her responsibility. It became clear that gaslighting doesn't only exist in external manipulators. It can embed itself internally as a habit of mistrusting one's own judgment. This mirrored Carl Rogers' observations about self-concept, that the way we perceive ourselves directly shapes our experience of the world, for better or worse. With awareness, she began interacting with others differently. Conversations became exercises in observing, listening, and trusting her own interpretations. She noticed the subtle ways people's words had influenced her, but now she could recognize when influence crossed into manipulation. It was a delicate balance, remaining open connection while protecting the integrity of her own perception. One evening, She attended an art exhibit, a quiet space with muted lighting and monochromatic sculptures. Each piece seemed to whisper a story of intention, perception, and human experience. Standing before a sculpture of intertwined hands, she thought about her past and realized that control and manipulation, though invisible, leave tangible impressions on one's life. The sculpture, in its frozen stillness, became a metaphor. The past cannot be changed, but it can be observed, studied, and understood. That night, Elise allowed herself to imagine her life without fear of doubt, not in a grand, dramatic way, but in the small, quiet acts. Prepare a meal without hesitation, laughing without self-consciousness, answering questions without overthinking. These micro-experiences, she realized, were the true foundation of recovery. Trust, like a muscle, strengthens with practice. Elise's mornings gradually became a sacred observance of life's subtleties. The early light spilling across the walls, the faint hum of the city awakening. Even the chill in the air became part of her study. Not the world outside alone, but of the self within. She began to take walks without purpose, letting her senses record small details. The rough bark of trees, the way leaves trembled in the slightest breeze, the distant laughter of children echoing through alleyways. Each sound, each image, each scent became an anchor to reality, a reminder that her mind was her own once more. She experimented with mindfulness exercises, sitting quietly in her apartment and simply observing the thoughts that arose without judgment. Some days, memories of Daniel surged, uninvited and sharp, carrying with them the old pangs of doubt. Yet she noted them with the same detached curiosity she applied to museum exhibit. She wrote in her journal, "Memory is a room I can enter freely, choosing what to examine, not what to accept blindly." Her afternoons were often spent revisiting old letters, photographs, and emails. Once, she found a message from her younger self, a note to a friend, filled with enthusiasm and plans. She read it slowly, savoring the optimism and trust she had once carried. There was no longer a shadow of doubt that she had once been that person. That trust, long buried, had begun to take root again. In psychology, this is a process akin to narrative therapy, reclaiming your story by re-engaging with past experiences on your terms. Elise noticed her perceptions sharpening. In a conversation with a co-worker, she observed subtle cues that suggested persuasion. The way words were emphasized, the brief hesitations, the repetition of certain points. Previously, these might have unsettled her, triggering self-doubt. Now, she simply cataloged them, small exhibits of human behavior. She wrote in her journal that night, "Observation without judgment is power." The realization thrilled her. The same human tendencies that had once threatened her autonomy now became lessons, guides understanding rather than sources of fear. One weekend, she decided to volunteer at a local community center. She led small workshops for young adults about emotional awareness, teaching them to notice manipulation and influence in subtle ways. Her approach was gentle, storytelling, examples from daily life, and encouragement to trust one's intuition. By articulating these lessons, she solidified her own understanding. She realized that teaching was another form of observing, reinforcing, and reclaiming autonomy. The line between personal reflection and contribution to others blurred beautifully. Even her leisure activities took on deeper meaning. Elise began to sketch scenes from her walks, abstract patterns of light and shadow, the textures of walls and streets, the forms of clouds drifting overhead. Each drawing was accompanied by a reflection. What did this scene evoke? How did it affect perception and feeling? This creative practice, rooted in self-observation, became a tangible extension of her museum of thought. Every sketch, every note, every reflection was an artifact of her recovered mind. As autumn arrived, the rhythms of life began to mirror her internal stability. She cooked meals thoughtfully, savoring each flavor. She noticed how her body responded to the seasons, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the chill creeping into her fingertips. In every sensation, she found evidence that her mind and body were her own. She wrote, "Even the smallest experiences are proof of autonomy. The mind can be manipulated, but the senses remain a bridge to reality." In social interactions, Elise now carried a quiet confidence. She could hear the persuasive undertones in other speech, yet respond calmly, grounded in her own observation. When friends shared concerns or sought advice, she listened fully, acknowledging their reality without letting it cloud her perception. This balance, she discovered, was the essence of resilience: empathy without surrender, connection without compromise of self. During a winter evening, she visited a small, quiet museum, her favorite black and white photograph exhibition. She walked slowly, noting the textures of old photographs, the deliberate placement of each piece, and the curator's choices in lighting and space. She realized this mirrored her own journey. Each memory, each experience, each learned insight carefully curated, observed, and understood. The analogy delighted her. Life, like a museum, could be navigated thoughtfully, without panic or fear, by the careful observer. Elise also began integrating literature and psychology into her routine more intentionally. She revisited works by Carl Jung, Daniel Kahneman, Carl Rogers, and Judith Herman, weaving their insights into her reflections. Each reading became a lens through which she could analyze not just others' behaviors, but her own. She noted patterns of thought, habitual responses, and lingering doubts, always returning to the principle that awareness was autonomy. In one particularly introspective moment, she reflected on the internalized gaslighting she had carried for so long. She recognized the subtle voices of doubt that had been nurtured by past experiences, even outside of Daniel's influence. Journaling became an active practice of disentangling those threads, questioning each moment of self-criticism. Is this my thought, or a remnant of past manipulation? By framing her internal dialogue as a series of exhibits to study, she regained authority over her mind. Spring brought with it new opportunities. Elise began writing essays, exploring the interplay of perception, influence, and resilience. She shared them online, anonymously at first, hoping to reach others who might have endured similar subtle manipulations. The feedback was profound. People resonated with her reflections, sharing stories of their own journeys through doubt and recovery. She realized that the act of expression was also an act of liberation. Her personal museum had become public, not an invasion of privacy, but an invitation to observe, reflect, and reclaim. By now, her apartment had become a sanctuary, not merely a space to live, but a space to think, feel, and witness. She arranged small collections: a plant that thrived on a windowsill, a collection of stone from walks, sketches of light on walls. Each object was deliberate, a symbol of observation and autonomy. The room, once empty and oppressive, now pulsed with quiet, intentional life. Elise's growth culminated not in dramatic confrontation, but in the seamless integration of awareness into daily living. She understood that autonomy was not about defiance, but about sustained observation and gentle reclamation of self. She wrote in her journal one morning, "Trust in oneself is not earned in moments of resistance alone, but in the quiet persistence of noticing, reflecting, and choosing." Even when she encountered attempts at manipulation in the world, subtle suggestions from co-workers, social media nudges, or casual remarks from acquaintances, she observed without alarm. Each instance was cataloged, reflected upon, and released. She no longer required external validation to confirm reality. Her perception itself was sufficient. The museum she had created in her mind had expanded into every aspect of life, a living exhibit of resilience, awareness, and autonomy. And in that understanding, Elise embraced a profound sense of freedom. Not the loud triumph of liberation, but the quiet bloom of certainty that the mind can be observed, influenced, and healed. That doubt, once seated, can be untangled with patience. That perception, once questioned, can be reclaimed. Her story, though deeply personal, became a testament to the subtle power of self-observation and psychological insight. And for anyone who listens closely, there is a lesson. The mind, though susceptible to influence, is never powerless. Trust, attention, reflection, these are the keys to reclaiming the narrative of one's own life. Elise walked forward each day in quiet purpose, her inner museum growing with every step. She smiled softly, aware that the journey of observation, reflection, and self-trust will continue indefinitely, a lifelong exhibit of resilience, insight, and freedom. Elise discovered that some of the most profound insights came not from grand moments, but from the smallest, almost imperceptible interactions. She noticed the way a barista smiled when she repeated an order correctly, The careful attention a neighbor paid while planting flowers, or the hesitation in someone's voice when they tried to persuade her. Each moment became a study, a reflection of human behavior, and the subtle dynamics of influence. She wrote in her journal, "Even kindness carries intention, and every intention is observable if I look closely." She began practicing active reflection in mundane routines. Washing dishes became a meditation in noticing textures, temperatures, and patterns of movement. Walking down familiar streets, she observed behavior she had once ignored. A cyclist adjusting speed to match the pedestrian's pace, an elderly man holding a door longer than necessary for someone to pass. These small acts of awareness reminded her that human behavior is a continuous stream of choices, often invisible, but meaningful when observed. One morning, Elise noticed a child crying in a park. Parents hurried over, offering comfort, sometimes admonishment, sometimes distraction. She observed quietly, analyzing the responses, the timing, the tone. She considered the child's perception of these actions and reflected on her own past, how her experiences had been interpreted, twisted, or dismissed. The child's world was being shaped in subtle ways, just as hers had been, and awareness could serve as a shield. Her practice extended to her relationships as well. When friends and acquaintances expressed opinions, she listened carefully, identifying when influence crossed into pressure. She became skilled at distinguishing genuine guidance from manipulation. Over coffee one afternoon, a colleague suggested an opinion on a work project. Elise felt a familiar twinge of doubt creep in, but instead of reacting, she paused, observed the subtle emphasis in the speech, and chose her own response thoughtfully. The sense of agency, though quiet, felt empowering. Elise also began exploring reflective journaling with prompts designed to probe deeper. What moments today challenged my perception? Which interactions felt authentic? And which felt suggestive? Where did I feel a subtle tug on my attention? Each entry became a map of her evolving autonomy, a living exhibit of growth and understanding. She often revisited old entries, marveling at the progress and noticing the subtlety of shifts in perception she had not recognized in real time. In the evenings, she allowed herself moments of quiet imagination, envisioning how different situations might unfold, how people's intentions might be interpreted, and how she could maintain clarity amidst subtle influence. She wrote poetry, abstract reflections, and even short narratives about imagined encounters. This creative exercise not only reinforced her autonomy, but became a bridge between observation and understanding. She realized imagination, when combined with awareness, was a tool to explore human behavior safely, without emotional overwhelm. A turning point came one rainy afternoon when she volunteered at a local counseling center. Listening to others' stories of doubt, manipulation, and self-discovery, she recognized patterns she had studied in herself. She shared insights cautiously, framing them as observations rather than judgments. The act of speaking aloud what she had internalized reinforced a lesson that knowledge gained strength when articulated and shared. Witnessing others navigate subtle manipulations reminded her that her recovery was not isolated. Many humans carry unseen burdens, and mindfulness and awareness could be a gift. Even mundane social media interactions became exercises in discernment. Comments, likes, and passive messages were observed without attachment, cataloged for patterns of influence, and released if manipulative undertones were detected. Her awareness transformed the way she consumed information, a psychological inoculation against the subtle pressures of daily digital life. She marveled at how often she had unconsciously surrendered perception in the past, and how easily awareness now fortified her mental space. One night, she wandered through her apartment, lighting candles and rearranging her journals and sketches. Each object and entry now felt purposeful, a curated exhibit of resilience and insight. She reflected. The process of self-observation had transformed her life into a living museum, each day contributing new artifacts of learning, perception, and autonomy. The power was quiet, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Her walks at dawn became longer. She intentionally sought out unfamiliar paths, observing both environment and people, the way a dog responded to its owner, the tone of voice exchanged between strangers, the fleeting expressions across passing faces. Each became a microcosm to study intention, authenticity, and influence. She found joy in these subtle observations, realizing that the world was a gallery of human behavior, and she had the privilege of witnessing it fully, consciously, and autonomously. By now, her confidence in her own perception had solidified. Doubt no longer followed her footsteps, but hovered lightly, manageable and understood. When manipulation was attempted, she could identify it swiftly and react thoughtfully, without panic or internalized guilt. Her life had become a continuous exhibition, not of past trauma, but of reclaimed clarity. Elise ended each day with a ritual of reflection. She lit a candle, sipped tea, and reviewed the day's observations. Journals were revisited, sketches reviewed, and patterns of growth noted. She smiled softly, understanding that autonomy and awareness were not final destinations, but ongoing exhibitions, each day adding new insights, each interaction a subtle artifact of understanding human behavior and reclaiming the self. Elise noticed how subtle moments became anchors in her daily life. The quiet hum of a kettle boiling, the soft rustle of pages as she flipped through her journal, the distant laughter of children playing outside. All of it reminded her that reality was layered and alive, separate from the doubts that had once consumed her. She began to give herself permission to feel fully present, to inhabit each moment without hesitation. Her mornings became small rituals of reflection. Sitting by the window, she observed shadows shift as sunlight moved across the room. Each shadow, each change in light, was a reminder of perspective, how things could appear different depending on one's angle. Yet the essence remained unchanged. The recognition of this subtle truth gave her confidence to trust her own perceptions again. At work, Elise noticed herself responding with clarity and calm where confusion had previously ruled. When colleagues offered contradictory opinions or subtle critiques, she could discern fact from suggestion. Her voice, once hesitant, carried quiet authority. The confidence was not loud or performative. It was the quiet strength of someone who had reclaimed her mind. One evening, while walking through a nearby park, she paused by a fountain. Watching the water ripple, she reflected on her journey. Gaslighting had tried to distort her memory, her self-belief, even her laughter. Yet here she was aware, grounded, and resilient. The fountain's ripples reminded her that life flows continuously. Moments of distortion pass, leaving clarity behind. She began documenting these reflections, not as evidence for anyone else, but as a personal archive of growth. Each entry traced patterns of thought, subtle victories, and realizations about human behavior and manipulation. It became a map of her mind, a testament to the strength she had cultivated through observation and mindfulness. Elise also reached out to a small circle of trusted friends. She shared her experiences with care, focusing not on blame, but on insight. By speaking about her journey, she reinforced her own understanding while creating a space where others could recognize manipulation and reclaim their autonomy. She realized that learning and healing were not solitary acts. They were enriched by connection and reflection. In the evenings, she sometimes returned to the photograph of herself laughing, the one that had once felt foreign. Now, looking at it, she remembered the sound of her laughter, the warmth of the sunlight, and the fullness of the moment. The memory was hers again, intact, unaltered by doubt. That photograph became a symbol of trust restored, a reminder that while reality can be challenged, it can never be fully erased. Her apartment, once heavy with unspoken tension, now felt like a museum of her mind. Each object, each corner, each quiet space was a witness to growth, insight, and resilience. Elise walked through it daily, acknowledging the subtle victories, the learning embedded in every choice, every interaction, every observation. The past remained a part of her, but it no longer dictated her present. And in this ongoing practice of reflection, observation, and mindful engagement, she recognized a profound truth. Autonomy is not a destination. It is the accumulation of small acts of self-trust, the repeated choice to honor perception, memory, and intuition. Life's subtle patterns, once sources of doubt, have become guides, leading her steadily forward. With a calm smile, Elise allowed herself to embrace the fullness of her experience. The challenges, the manipulations, the victories, and the quiet clarity that now defined her. She understood that the human mind could be deceived, but it could also be reclaimed, nurtured, and strengthened. And within that reclamation lay freedom, not loud or dramatic, but enduring, quiet, and unshakable. The journey, she realized would continue, but it was no longer defined by manipulation or doubt. It was defined by awareness, reflection, and the unwavering trust in oneself. Each day was an exhibit in the museum of her mind, intricate, delicate, and illuminating. Through observation, patience, and self-trust, Elise had turned the quiet erosion of her past into a landscape of insight. She had transformed uncertainty into clarity, manipulation into understanding, and doubt into resilience. And in this space, freedom quietly thrived, a lasting testament to the mind's remarkable capacity to reclaim itself.